Hi, everyone. Great to see you all here after a few years of being in the dark, I guess. And so great to see what Greenfin has become. I remember going to the first conference a few years ago. I'm really excited to lead this panel today on economic justice. As Grant said, I'm a contributing editor at Greenfin, and I'm director of communications at Generate Capital, a sustainable infrastructure company. A lot of you know me from my years as a journalist covering sustainable finance. What a lot of people don't know about me is that my grandfather was actually one of the first corporate executives, Black corporate executives in North America, Campbell Soup, in the 1940s, when Jim Crow was still a thing. And his colleagues had to help him get a mortgage, get around red line laws. And these choices that companies make can have generational impact that I'm just an example of today. So I'm so excited to have this conversation about what companies are doing on economic justice in this space. And we have a tremendous panel for you today. Kim Thompson, principal at PwC, and she's on the CEO Action for Racial Equity Fellow. And then Cat Berman, an entrepreneur and founder of C-Note, a former managing director at Schwab, and she runs a women-led impact platform at C-Note focused on community investments and economic mobility. So let's get started. There's a lot of conversation about economic justice the past few years. What's happened? Are companies still doing that? Is interest waning? What do you see from your vantage point at CEO Action, Kim?
So I started my career way back when as a regular person in corporate America, as a lawyer in the general counsel's office. And about 4 years ago, there was the start to companies started kind of getting interested. And our CEO from PwC started something called CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, getting companies interested in at least doing something internally within the four corners of their organizations. And you know, these CEOs signed a pledge to do 4 things internally facing, and then you know, fast forward to 2020, in the wake of Ahmaud Arbery's murder and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, our CEO stepped back and said, we need to do more. So let's get some of those CEOs, now 2,400 of them, who had signed the pledge, to do something looking outwardly facing, and call it a fellowship of CEO Action for Racial Equity. And I'm a fellow in this fellowship now. We're working full-time, over 100 different companies in corporate America, all working together to really try to move the needle on racial equity issues, not just economic issues, but also public safety, also education, and also healthcare. And we're making a difference, and it's exciting to see multiple companies joining together, joining forces, bringing different expertise from a variety of different types of organizations, all working toward a goal of trying to tackle systemic racism and make a difference. And so I encourage any company who's not already participating and looking for ways to get involved. One great way is to join this fellowship, to get companies to participate in the fellowship and really start making a difference for, you know, from working on public policy and corporate engagement strategies to end systemic racism.
Yeah, well, Kat, let's talk about your vantage point on this space as well, because we talked a lot this year, actually. We've seen in proxy season, there's civil rights audit requests and racial equity audit requests, pay gap stuff. People are really looking at this issue. But what are they doing to take systemic action? What are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll share a little bit about what we do at C-Note. So we help corporations use their balance sheet to really address racial justice efforts and commitments. I think most of us in this room believe that where our money sleeps at night, where we invest, can be transformational for us and for communities. And so now we're seeing corporations really step in and say, wow, my balance sheet can actually be a tool for change. If I'm committed, or my narrative says that I care about racial justice, how does my balance sheet reflect that, right? Where I deposit dollars, where I invest, how does that reflect my commitment to racial justice? And so our platform helps corporations do that at scale, with trackable reporting. And so as we look across, what we see is, number one, it's really hard for a lot of corporations. I think number one, a lot of our partners started on the human capital front. So number one, they took an audit and said, where am I? How are we doing? We say we care about racial equity, racial justice, but are we actually walking the walk? And so after they've done that pulse check, then they say, great, where do I get started? And oftentimes it's around human capital, right? Are my human capital policies, procedures, promotional activities reflecting said commitment? And then you see a few other kind of baby steps. We've seen some really exciting diversity procurement opportunities and groups come out of this as well. And I'd say where we're seeing today now is really a movement towards what we call balance sheet activism, which is this idea of seeing who you bank with, where you place your investments as a tool for change. From our perspective, we help corporations deploy deposits, for example, into minority deposit institutions, into Black-owned banks, for example, or deploy investments into CDFIs or community development financial institutions where they're needed. And so for many corporate partners, this is the first time they've ever done this. So I think it's exciting, but I also think it's a journey of education for a lot of our corporate partners.
Yeah. Kim, could you talk a little bit about the journey you're seeing companies go through? We talked a little bit when we were talking about level 1, level 2, level 3. Like, how are companies thinking about getting started and going forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways that companies can get engaged, and it really depends on where you are in the journey, as you said. So, I mean, some companies might just start with, at least with respect to sort of my world and CEO Action for Racial Equity and Diversity and Inclusion, start with signing the pledge. Get your CEO to sign the pledge and just do things internally within your organization, like having a plan for DEI and discussing it with your board, or doing training on unconscious biases, and internally facing, having conversations and making sure you've created an environment where you can have conversations about race and equity. That's sort of level 1. Level 2 is maybe participating in CEO Action for Racial Equity for us. Maybe not as a fellow, maybe as a volunteer. One of the companies who's a signatory company but who's not participating in the fellowship, giving people into the fellowship, are still, giving us a few hours a week as an expert in any given area. All in is, at least for us, working as a fellow. Our firm has 30 fellows in the fellowship, but a number of companies have, maybe 5 people working full-time, maybe part-time, maybe 50%, maybe for 2 full years. But there's a lot of different, sort of levels of involvement that people and companies can get involved, at least with respect to, from where I sit in this fellowship, working on racial equity issues, all the way from internally within your company to looking outside in the real world, all the way from sort of a little bit of part-time to full-time, multiple people, all in.
Yeah, you made a couple points there that are really interesting. One about it being a CEO-led initiative. I know at Generate, we're a member of Renewables Forward, which is a CEO-led initiative in the energy space, which is designed to sort of create an energy industry that looks different from the energy industry of the past, and by bringing people in and bringing people from different industries and just making sure you're building a diverse industry. That's really cool to see it CEO-led industry initiative across the company. How do companies step out of these 4 walls, Cat, and sort of see beyond themselves and the systemic impact they can have?
Well, I'll start with saying I think the intention is incredible. We work with partners ranging from Xylem in water solutions to Apple to Patagonia. So I think what we're seeing is really this commitment to racial justice is industry agnostic. It truly is coming from all walks of life in terms of corporate America and globally, which is so exciting. And then it gets hard, right? So we all get together, we all say we're committed to this, and then we go, now what's next? And so I think, that admittance, frankly, and giving ourselves permission to say this is really hard work, and it's even harder at the level of scale each of you are playing at, running, right? Being really a force in corporate America. But I think the second really positive steps is the peer discussions. One of the positive things we're seeing at C-Note is as peers talk together and learn from each other of what went well and how did they get it across the finish line. So if you're 2 corporations who both want to see advancement in racial equity in the workplace or using your balance sheet for change. How do you do that? And how do you learn from your peer who successfully did it? And so kind of facilitating some of that peer-to-peer engagement or making that connection, we love to do informally. We work with groups who do it much more formally. But I think learning from one another is one really great step we've seen advance this. And then making it really visible as well, I think is a second, which is just don't do it in a box. If you've seen a solution work, if you've been able to do something really innovative in your workplace, share it. Share it visibly, share it with your employees, and share it across the industry. And then last, and I think this is something I know the three of us believe in, is how do we do this sustainably? Because I'd venture to guess most of us want to see racial equity and a commitment to racial justice as a movement, not a moment. And so how do we commit to that sustainably? That takes enterprise commitment. That takes literally baking it into our business models, into our corporate agenda, into our board reports to do this not once, not in a press release, but year over year. And have the racial justice program, something embedded within a CEO's practice, have balance sheet activism, or making sure that minority deposit institutions are a staple in, your treasury management. Those are things we can do, but you have to have that conversation of how do we do this sustainably, not just in 2022. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point about how to do this sustainably. A lot of people focus on hiring to start, but then you have to go up to retaining after you hire, right? Tell me what's the why that companies have, Kim? What do you see? Why are companies doing this? Why do this versus something else?
There are so many reasons for the why. I mean, start with your employees. Do you want to look like the company of yesteryear that all the people look the same and you don't bring in the diverse talent? Or do you want to, think about looking like the firm of the future, the company of the future with very diverse talent? What do young people want as they're looking for jobs? Do they want a company who is forward thinking, that's doing the things? Edelman does a trust Barometer survey every year. They look at, I talked to 30,000 people or so, and they say, what do you expect from your CEO? And 80% expect that their CEOs are going to be talking about topics like racial equity and the topics that are maybe controversial and interesting, and they want to hear their CEOs talking about what they're doing to make the world a better place. But even if you're not thinking about your employees and you're not thinking about bringing in a talent who's interested, what about your clients and your customers? Your clients and customers all care about these issues, and we see time and time again situations where companies who aren't thinking about equity, they end up getting ostracized, or people start not working with them or not wanting to buy their products and services. But even if you're not thinking about the clients and you're not thinking about your customers, it's coming anyway. The regulators are talking about it, so everybody is talking about it. Do you want to look like the company of the past, or do you want to be a leader? Do you want to be a leader, or do you want to be a follower? Companies want to be leaders. So jump right in, get ahead of it, and get involved. It will help the bottom line. It will help you attract customers. It will also help the economy, which helps us all. The pie gets bigger. Everybody gets a bigger piece of the pie if we're ending unemployment, or by bringing more diverse talent in. It's like a win, and we all need to get involved.
I liked that win. But I think in the energy industry and the energy transition, we definitely see that a lot, where we think, oh, this is actually an opportunity to build a whole new industry. And who are we building that industry with, and who can we bring with us? And what do you think? What's the why, Cat, that you're seeing? What's motivating?
Very similar. I mean, we have corporations that come to us and say, my CEO said we have to do it because there was an agenda at the board meeting. And one is around ESG. And I'll share this. And I love the earlier statement about let's not talk in our alphabet. So in terms of ESG, diversity, equity, inclusion, racial justice, these are all very critical topics at a board level for many of our corporate partners. So one is saying, how do I address any, if not all of those, with the power of my balance sheet? At CNOTE, we emphasize the cash and fixed income piece. So how do they use the power of cash? For example, Apple is one of our partners, one of the largest cash holders we all know, and decided to take a portion of their cash and move it into minority deposit institutions at scale year over year. Same with Netflix, same with PayPal, and so forth and so forth. And so how do you use cash as a tool for change and as an ESG lever? So sometimes it's coming directly from the board. Sometimes, to Kim's point, it's coming from employees who are saying, I saw this press release that our company cares, and I've seen you do nothing since then. And so being able to really activate it in very tangible ways that don't take 2 years to get off the ground, which is why I love the CEO pledge. It's really an opportunity to do something meaningful. And so really from employees is another place we're hearing it as well. And I'd also say the third was really competitive. And this is a great point I think Kim was alluding to, which is at the end of the day, right, many of our corporate partners are looking at each other and trying to understand what their competition is doing. And oftentimes their competition is out in front of them. And so how do you really get in front of this and show the power of your brand and the power of your corporate values in an authentic, trackable way, in a way that doesn't just kind of wave the flag of we care about this, but really can show meaningful impact. And I think there's some really tangible ways that are now accessible to do that.
Yeah, sometimes when we talk about this, we say this is like a 100-year problem, right? That we're dealing with, or a 200-year problem. How do we measure progress as a company in this space? And what's it going to look like in 2 to 5 years? Maybe each of you, I'll ask you for the next minute session.
Yeah, I mean, 2 to 5 years, look, it feels like in this country right now, everything is on a pendulum, and it almost seems like it's getting wider and wider and more extreme. I really, really, really hope that we're going to not have to have another George Floyd moment with a pandemic and everything hitting it all at once to make us continue this movement. I think we're on the right track. I see a lot of good movement. I know there's the pull to move us back, just as in the same way as there's a pull to move us back on so many social issues as we saw from the Supreme Court last week. I'm hopeful that we're going to continue to move forward, and we're not going to see, hopefully, not too big of a swing trying to pull us the other direction. But I can tell you, for me personally, I will be pushing so hard against the pullback in the other direction.
Yeah, I'll just say something that may be surprising for a lot of folks, which is I think one of the simplest ways for corporations to make a sustainable commitment to racial justice is cash. The cash that sits on your balance sheet could be invested in communities of color tomorrow. Entrepreneurship and home ownership in Black communities are two primary sources of wealth creation. So if we're really serious about changing the wealth gap in this country and really advancing wealth creation in Black communities, it is the corporate cash sitting there that can be moved literally tomorrow that I think is one of our greatest levers for change. So you asked 2 to 5 years. I hope that we see that as not a small group of jet setters doing this, but every corporation in the room is using their corporate balance sheet to advance communities of color.
Great. Well, thank you to both of you for this wonderful discussion. Thanks to Greenfin for hosting it. And we'll go to the next session.
Thank you. Thank you.